I'll introduce Doug Roscoe. Doug is here to talk about some tutorials that he developed. Doug's also the 2013 Best Practices. He won the Best Practices Award for Innovative Use of Technology this past year. So, Doug?
Okay, thanks, Tracy. So the online tutorials that I developed were part of my research methods course in political science. It's a course that our majors take, and usually they're junior, sometimes they're senior year, sometimes in their junior and senior year, sometimes in their sophomore, junior, and senior year. It's one of our difficult courses. It's kind of like a gateway course because we really get into some social science statistics, and that can trip some students up. And there's really I think 4 pieces to it. There's a kind of methodology of social science, scientific method. We learn quantitative analysis up to and through regression analysis. There's a writing and political science component, so students understand how to write a research paper in the format of political science. And then finally, there's a part of the course that's hands-on. It involves SPSS software, which is statistical software. Has anybody used SPSS? Yeah, okay. So you're a little bit familiar with it. And instructing software, instructing SPSS is actually one of the parts of the course that I like, and I think the students actually like it because it's very hands-on, it's applied, they get to play with their own data, their research paper is using their own quantitative analysis. So I like it, but I found that there were sometimes struggles teaching students how to use SPSS. And one of the problems that I had was, you could take a lot of class time to sort of explain how it worked, but that wasn't always good enough because students needed to study how to do it, and they needed to work on their homework independently and so forth. And I many years ago introduced lab days, so I do have some lab days where we sit in the lab and they work on their homework and I go around and kind of help them, but I needed to have a way for them to learn. Now the traditional way is to have a companion text. So most research methods textbooks will have a companion that teaches SPSS. Some of them integrated into the book, but mainly it's this companion text. And what they end up doing is taking screenshots of the SPSS software as it goes, and mixed in with it is text explaining how to do it. And I had a couple of problems with this companion text over the years. One was just a matter of coverage. It would talk them through commands that I didn't really care about them learning. And I didn't really need them. So then you had to say, well, read pages 17 to 23, but then skip 25, 26, and 27, read 28 to 30, So it was very confusing. And then there were some things that I really wanted it to cover that it didn't cover, and I ended up having to explain those in class. So it was incomplete and too much in some ways. The other problem I had is that it didn't really show them how to do it. Using SPS is a doing kind of a doing thing. It's not it's not just a conceptual understanding. You need to actually move stuff and do stuff physically. And this was a static process for learning a dynamic process. And so I thought, well, why don't I try doing a screen capture to show them how to use SPSS? And this was when, Camtasia was first on my radar. This was in 2010. And I had started to see some folks use it, and I had used it for some other things. So I decided to create a set of online tutorials and to create them as learning objects that I could reuse and share across and all that sort of thing. Now, the software that I use to create the tutorials is Camtasia Studio. And the way that Camtasia Studio works is narrated screen capture. And so what you do is you open up Camtasia Studio, and then you would go into here and you could select, for instance, record the screen. And how many people have used Camtasia, either Relay or, so you've all used it, so you all know how it works. I'm preaching to the choir here. Right, so you know the process. And I created 7 learning objects to go with the different parts of the course with various lengths, anywhere from about 10 minutes to about 20 minutes. I think if I were to do them over, which I'm going to have to do soon because we're about 3 versions of SPSS further along since 2010, that I would make them shorter and into smaller bites. But this is how I instruct. I got rid of the companion text, and so students would just watch these videos in advance of their homework day in lab. So in the lab days, they would have already viewed through these and have ideally would have viewed them, in the same way that ideally they do their readings before class, but maybe not always. And so they come in with this video under their, scrutiny, and then they would work through their homework in lab, and I'd be able to go around and help them with troubleshooting and such. Now, these are, of course, supplemented now by the Atomic Learning modules. So if you go to the Atomic Learning section, you can get, there's like 100 maybe different SPSS Atomic Learning modules. So now I'm actually teaching the course this semester for the first time since I taught it in 2010. For various reasons, I was off teaching it. And so this year, when I've built my course up, I've put these in, but I've also included some of those Atomic Learning modules. But there's some differences between the two. The Atomic Learning modules are very short, like half a minute, 45 seconds usually, and they're very discrete in what they tell you to do. It's like how to open up a dialog box and run it. And what I've done in these is a little bit more advanced. It includes taking a look at the output and showing students what the output means, and then explaining it and sort of circling some things as I go. So there's a little bit of interpretation of the output as well as simply how to do the command. See if I can get this to go. You can see we're not going to get audio here. I forgot to tell you I have audio. Let's see if this works. No, we're not going to get audio.
You can ask for the variance.
All right, I'll go back to the start. It's not long.
You can go to this GDP data and go back to the statistics box. And we ask for the median and mode. But we can also go down and ask for the standard deviation. Calculates it for you nicely. You can ask for the variance. You can ask for the range if you want it. So the difference between the minimum and the maximum. Put the minimum and maximum in there. Don't worry about it.
All right, so you get the idea, right? You can just work right in the software program. You can point to things that you want to look at. And the nice thing about using Camtasia Studio is you can go back later and you can intersperse it with, if you have a tablet like I do, you can mark up the output and show students, like here, look at this and so forth. So it's a good way to kind of show them how to do an SPSS command as opposed to just describing how to do it. All right, so Camtasia Studio, a little bit about how you might do this. If you don't have a license, it's about $150 to get an academic license through UMass-Dartmouth. It's also available in the instructional development labs and in the recording studio and instructional development. And, of course, you can also get Camtasia Relay for free. And, in fact, this presentation is being recorded on Camtasia Relay. So there's kind of, what are we saying? There's kind of a meta thing going on here. But the difference is that for Relay, all you can do is take a single capture and there's no editing afterwards. One of the nice things about Studio is that you can overdub, so you can have multiple audio tracks. So if you have this great lecture capture and you want to go back and you said something wrong, you can go back and overdub it and fix your audio. You can also mix in a screen capture with still images or video. Right, so that's the other thing, is that it's not simply a lecture capture. If you have a video camera, you can show, you can record yourself marking a paper or looking at a chart or something like that. So anytime there's some object to look at and interpret or discuss, Camtasia Relay or Studio would be Studio would be useful for this. Can you use a video camera with Relay, or is it only screen capture?
You can use the webcam, right?
The webcam. Yeah, okay. So if you point your webcam at the right way, you could put a document in front of it or something. Okay. All right, so I guess the question is then, why would you want to do all this? Well, what I found in my course is that students really responded to these learning objects. And I'll talk a little bit about why I think they were helpful. But what I did is I asked students in a year-end evaluation online, I said, here are the 11 course learning outcomes. These were the 11 things that you were supposed to learn this semester. So I put that in their mind, so they were thinking about what they wanted to learn as opposed to whether they liked the course, because nobody likes research methods. People loathe the course. So I wanted them to think about what they learned. I put it in their mind, and I said, of all these things, what were, how helpful were they? And it was very helpful, somewhat helpful, helpful, not at all helpful. So I forget the 4 categories. And so what I have here are the top 2 categories. First, the very helpful, and then the very somewhat combined. So the top 1 and the top 2 combined are the data here. And there's some interesting things. First of all, you're looking down here, the tests were not very helpful for them. So good for summative purposes, but not very good for formative purposes. They didn't feel like that helped them learn the studying for the tests. Similarly, the research papers weren't great either. I had a few other things going on in this course that I was looking at. E-boards are on my tablet. I write all of my, instead of using PowerPoint, I just write as I go, kind of like an electronic blackboard, and I put graphs and figures and SPS output all in this combined kind of thing, and then I put it on the website so they can go back and look at kind of the record of the blackboard, so to speak, for the course. And that was they liked that a lot. Then the lectures, okay. The homework, not the greatest. This was also the semester where I was recording. Those were not really lecture videos. I think those were just podcasts. We were piloting some kind of software that semester. So all of the lectures were recorded as audio files and put on the website, and people could go back and listen to them. But really, one of the biggest hits for them were the learning outcomes, or the learning objects. The SPSS learning objects. And I think part of why they liked them is that they could go back to them when they needed to remember how to do something. For a lot of students, running and interpreting a correlation is a really new activity. And so to hear it once in class is one thing, and then to read it in a book is difficult to understand. But if they could go back and review it several times, it was, I think, very helpful for them to see how this works. So I thought that the assessment data provided a good bit of support for them as a tool. Okay, so that's basically what I did and what I found in terms of assessing it. And then all of this, though, has gotten me to think a little bit more about online versus face-to-face versus print versus video versus all different kinds of things. And as I've taught online for a number of years, and I've taught blended courses, and I do a lot of web enhanced stuff in my face-to-face courses, and now I'm planning to flip a course in the fall. And so as we start to think about all these things, we start to think about the kinds of learning activities that happen in a class, and there's sort of information passing, like like new concepts, knowledge, ideas have to be put forward. And then there's assimilation, there's application. So there's different kinds of things that we want to happen in our class. So I've started to think more about, what's the best way to do some of these things? And, when is online a better modality? When is it better to do something face-to-face? When is it better to just put something in text? When is it better to audio record something, and so forth? So for instance, I think a lot of faculty are, when they're flipping their course or they're doing an online course, they'll just audio record their lectures. And I did that the first couple times that I taught online. And to me, I don't know, just write it down. They can read it, right? If you're just using words to convey something, and you're just communicating a bunch of words, write it down. They can read, and they can reread. And it's easier to go back and reread something and highlight it than to listen to 45 minutes. And you can read something in 15 minutes that would take 45 minutes to listen to. Now some people may be auditory learners, as you pointed out earlier. So maybe there's something to be said for multiple modes like that. But sometimes you want to describe something in words. Sometimes you want to say something. Sometimes you want to show people how to do something. So I'm starting to think a little bit about when different kinds of modes might be good. And I think something like an online tutorial, an online learning object, is really good when you're teaching somebody how to do something. Now, obviously, with SPSS, it's how to run the commands and so forth. But I think there's probably lots of different kinds of learning goals that we have that might be amenable to this. I was trying to think earlier about some of these. For instance, if nursing students needed to learn how to read a medical chart, for instance, right? You could have a learning object that runs maybe 5, 8, 10 minutes with a medical chart, and you could walk through it and highlight as you go, and so the students would be looking at you, pointing at different parts of the and narrating what is on it, right? Which seems to me better than just a static description in text, because it'd be dynamic and would show you how you do it. Another thing it might be useful for is teaching students how to edit their writing, right? Writing is a process, and I think a lot of students crank out that first draft and they go, there it is, I'm done, And to actually show them how someone might edit their text, right? So to go into a document, show them how you edit, and look, I'm going back, and try to talk them through how you think as a writer, editing your own writing would be another way that you might do that, or showing students how to do a lab report in a science class. So I think anytime there's a doing involved, I think online is going to be an online object is going to be good. And then finally, whenever repetition is important, and you need students to see this over more than once. I mean, that's one of the big downfalls of the lecture is that you get it once and then it's gone, and you have notes that you took, and sometimes they're really cryptic when you go back 3 weeks later and what the heck was the professor talking about? These notes make no sense to me. So the nice thing about online and doing a learning object like this is that students can go back and they can review it over and over again. I think that was one reason why students also like the lecture videos that I had, is they can go back and they can review the content, because students oftentimes need to go through it more than once. So then that raises another interesting question: when is face-to-face a better modality? And so I don't have a good answer for that, but I think that's probably the kinds of questions that a lot of us are thinking about now. How do I divide up my time between my learning activities? Which ones do I stick online? Which ones do I record? Which ones do I put as text? And how do I mix that all together in ways that produce the best outcome for my students? That's my presentation. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that question, in terms of delivery and such.
I think repetition is always required.
Yeah.
I think your students are going to really build a lot of dendrites, which means memory about something. They need to come at it from different perspectives and read it again and again, or talking, or so I think it's the essential piece for them.
Right.
And I'll take issue with the idea of different learning modalities. I have found, and people write about this, brain learning, there's no evidence that people can learn better as listeners or viewers.
Yeah.
It's very popular and everybody's thinking about it, but there's no evidence that's emerging so far from brains that people are capable in one area more than another.
There's not visual learners or auditory learners and so forth, yeah.
The neat thing about varying the modality, though, is that it repeats it. It offers it in different ways,
right.
and that will increase learning. So it's kind of all mixed in the same. But I have to point it out because I see it everywhere. Everybody's talking about learning styles, and it's totally...
Yeah, right.
So you think that it's, for example, Rachel just said she prefers to listen to things.
I think the hooey about learning styles versus a learning preference is the point that
Preference.
I think it's a preference. I know, if I'm given material in one form versus another, there's a different success for me. And going back to my experience with teaching, I had learners that I could sit there and talk to them till I was blue in the face, and nothing would stick. Nothing would just wash over. Nothing would stick. But the minute I turned it into an aesthetic experience, excels. So I think that it's a preference for learning. I do think that everybody can learn in every modality, but I think that some people, given their strengths and weaknesses or what their past experiences have been, you have to take all that into consideration. And I think that the preference notion is the stronger preference.
Just to kind of back up what Ed was saying, you're right. The research shows that there's nothing. That, if you say, oh, this person, I prefer this, and I'm like, no, Rachel, you have to learn this other way. But you're actually, the test your outcomes are exactly the same.
Right. Would be more difficult for me to do that, but
Right. But at the same time, thinking about presenting things in multiple modalities gives you levels instead of just saying this is pure repetition and rereading my notes. That's not super effective. Instead, being able to draw in extra material, talk about it, ask questions about it, present it in a different format, then you're just basically enhancing the memory then and elaborating the material instead of repeating it. So I think, when we give students these examples in SPSS, and then I'm guessing in the poli-sci research methods, you're giving them a general example, and then they're turning that, then applying that to their own project.
they end up doing that. I'll go through the homeworks. They're working through a lot of different small data analysis.
Right. So I did the same thing in psych research methods, where for us, they have a stats class earlier, and they have a content course. Then they have a methods course in the content. So at that point, we're doing labs where we go through all these examples together. I'm just thinking, I'm like, this is awesome, because there's a lot of things. There's so many things to do in research methods, and being able to kind of offload some of the, they haven't used SPSS for 2 years, they forget, would be a huge help to kind of be like, look at that example outside class. Now we're going to do this example in class, and then later you're going to do this with your own data.
Yeah. And I think, and again, I think for that purpose, it's really helpful to, I would make them smaller chunks, so I would have, as opposed to, if I go back here to the list, I might say in the bivariate tables, which runs 14 minutes, here's how you run a crosstabs command. That probably takes 2 minutes. And then probably the rest of that is all interpretation, making sure that they have the columns correct, percentages correct, and so forth, and how you read through a table and so forth. So, yeah, I think for review, that's better. And that's one of the things the atomic learning modules do well. They're small little bites, and but they don't get it all into interpretation. It's all very practical, how to do a command and so forth.
I was going to mention that even when we do our videos for instructional development, that's kind of the approach we take. So, for example, if we're creating a slew of videos for a training, and within the training, there's actual text components or documentation or references to help give the reasoning behind it, much like I think the last 12 minutes of what your video would be, but then the videos are really how-to points. How to do this, and there's just the step-by-step with maybe a key reminder or something to just help them make that choice while they're going through the video.
Yeah, and then really neat would be able to, which I know you can do in Camtasia, is to have that integrate the homework right into it. So they watch 4 minutes of video, how to run a command, and then you have them run a command. You have them do it right online at the same time.
I think last year I figured this out, this chunking idea, because somebody had given me a video, like an hour-long talking head video, and I had to learn from that. And it's not possible to learn just listening to him, but I had a pass of it. So I would stop him every 30 seconds. I would write down the things that were new for me, and then I would continue his talk. And it took much longer to do that, but I was able to record and memorize and figure out what I learned from that chunking.
So your preference was to chunk and write down and pause, as opposed to just listen.
No, I chunked and listened and then wrote down. I swear to God, there's no evidence in the brain stuff, but lots of people try to practice it and argue that it's effective.
Right. It's not an end all, but it's definitely, I think the preference aspect of it is something that has to be done.
We get it done. Some people, I don't get it though. We're all human beings. We all can think but it doesn't matter.
I know.
In this semester, I remember now what it was that we were piloting. It was the audio capture and then screen capture combined. I forget, was it Panopto maybe?
Oh, it was web, yeah.
Yeah, 2010. So that's what was uploaded, was an image of my screen and me writing on the e-board and doing SPSS during class along with my audio, and it would go up as a link, and I would post it as a link, and students would just be able to go and see it. And I remember there was a student who never came to class, and he took the first exam and he got an A on it. I mean, he was there once in a while, but his attendance was horrible. And in that class, if you don't come, you're doomed in that class. Generally speaking, if you get behind, you're doomed. And then he did really well on the second exam. Again, having not come to class much. So I asked him. I said, "Are you watching those videos, online?" He's like, "Yeah." And I was kind of, I said, "Are you not coming to class because you're just watching?" They said, "Yeah." And at first I was kind of angry, you got to come to class. It's not a substitute. And I thought, well, if he's doing all right on the exam, why do I care? You know what I mean? If he's doing okay, And so I kind of got over that. And it was a big shift in my thinking to think, well, if he can learn just as well, listen, and maybe even better, because like you say, he can pause it. If he gets, sleepy after 15 minutes, he can take a little micro nap or go for a walk or something and then come back and be a little fresher instead of having to slog through an hour and 15 minutes of Professor Roscoe drawing out.
But I think that feeds the fear that a lot of faculty have. I'm just going to be supplanted. All you're going to do is record my lectures and put it online. And so there's no role for me anymore because all they got to have is those videos. And maybe that is eventually going to drive a different way of being in class.
Yeah. Well, and that gets, and that's kind of the question I've been struggling with. Well, what's left to do, face to face? And as I've taught online, I've realized that you can do a pretty good job online. There's most of the things you want to accomplish. Even like what I always thought was the one clincher would be discussions. Discussions would always be better face to face because you can see people. But I completely disagree. I think discussions are far better online. Because people are people who are quiet or shy are more likely to speak up, and people are more likely to give thoughtful answers because they can reflect a little bit before they talk. And whether that's chatting or discussion boards, it's just radically better, I think. So what does that leave left for the classroom? I think my hunch is that a couple of things are important. One is I think it's useful for students to kind of pique their interest about a topic or a puzzle. To kind of get them to understand why it's interesting to study political parties, or why do we care about interest group membership, and why it's a collective action problem, and so forth. And then the answers to that they can get probably better online working independently. But to get them interested in the topic, I think that happens better in the classroom, partly because the instructor is passionate and excited about it. You can see why it's interesting to them. And I think that's maybe another part, is that it's interesting to see how professors interact with their ideas, and how they think through a topic. And I think back to, like college professors that I remember that were influential to me. And it was partly their course, but it was partly a question of intellectual style. I saw the way that they thought. I saw the way that they thought critically. I saw the way they approached their discipline. And you kind of take a model from that. And that's interesting. And I think that's something that I think online students miss. And so I don't know. Maybe there's some role for that still in the classroom. I don't know.
In defense of classroom discussions, if I give an assignment for students to read or experience something and they do it because they know when they come in they're going to be evaluated on the discussion rigorously, I get more of that reflection going on. Even the folks who are reticent and don't want to speak, they're well prepared because they've done the reading and they feel like they could say something in class now because they've done the reading. So I increase the discussion that way. In the same way you're speaking about mine, I'm stuck in between, I don't know which is better. But at your point, both of them can do it. And I think most people aren't there yet. They don't get it.
Yeah. I've seen some interesting use of classrooms for peer-to-peer learning. This guy up at Harvard, Eric Mazur, I think is his name, physics, and he uses this. It's like clicker technology, but it's all smartphone based. And what's the name of it? You guys know what it is?
It's either Lecture Tools or Top Hat Monaco, or it's a few up on there.
Yeah, learning analytics or something like that. It's got some kind of fancy name. But he does this great thing where he has assigned seating in his classroom, and what he does is he's flipped it. So he's a flip the classroom kind of guy. So he has all the students go through all the content, lectures, and all that learning outside of the classroom. And in the class, he basically uses like clicker. What's that? Learning catalytics. Yeah. And he has them. He'll give them a clicker question, and he'll see what's correct. The computer will analyze, who got the answer right, who got it wrong, and then it will match people up. It'll say, go see Jeff Smith. He's in the row in front of you, 3 seats down. That's right, and they match people up, and then you have to talk about it, and then you go back and you click again, and you see that there's increases in correct answers, and then if you have assigned seating, it remembers who got matched up with whom, and if someone was talked out of a correct answer, it never matches them up anymore. So it learns over the course of the semester who to match up in order to create better peer-to-peer learning.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could implement that online, but it would be hard. I think you'd have to have all these dyads communicating, synchronously. Probably you could do it asynchronously, but it would be very complex to have the timing on that. So
talking spaces for all that, and watching the talking space.
yeah, but I think to use learning Camtasia, everyone has to have a smartphone because it's like Top Hat Monocle in that you can answer text answers and there's like a heat map kind of thing. So pick Albania from the map and it shows where everybody touched the map and so forth. So it's pretty flexible like that. But I told my students, do you have a smartphone and would you be willing to purchase a smartphone if it was required in your class? And maybe I think close to 90% said yes, but that leaves 10% who, one thing to ask them to get an eye clicker, but to go get a smartphone is a little